Well, you see, many of us today, especially Christians, have not fully realized who they are. We too often allow ourselves to become overwhelmed by the sense of longing to a church or to a group or to any kind of spiritual organization, to being a part of a ministry. And we sometimes have an immediate feel, and because of that, we begin to lose sight of who we are. It's not done on purpose or intentional, but it tends to happen. I've seen it too often, especially in my own life. Because as a pastor, I have struggled with this myself. I have gotten too caught up in doing outreach and ministry programs, budgets, Bible studies, all these planning Sunday school, all of these things, and the other day-to-day things that we do that goes along with being part of a church. That I've gotten so focused on doing these things that my spiritual self began to be replaced by this ministry automaton. It was very draining. My ministry was and is a blessing. It's a part of who I am, and it's an outpouring of who I am as a Christian and what God has done for my life. Being able to do ministry is like it's like breathing to me. I have to always be in a position where I'm telling people about the goodness of Christ and about how God has brought me up and raised me up and using my life experiences as a ministry, as a testimony to how God can do some amazing things. But the most difficult time I've had was in ministry, in the church, as a youth pastor, as an assistant pastor, as a any position that I've held in the church. That has been the most draining on me because it seems like I have this stumbling block because I've come to understand that I lost sight of who I was. As a Christian, as a believer, as a follower, I lost sense of my identity. My identity became less of who God was calling to me to be and more of what the church wanted me to be. Wanted me to be the counselor. You wanted me to be the person that drove the truck, the person that led the Bible study. And these things are great, but my spiritual self began to suffer as a result. And what I've come to be aware of after the fact, of course, is that the conventional or traditional sense of ministry needs to transform into something that is fluid, something that is organic, that grows as we grow, matures as we mature. We have to be careful not to allow the things we do for our church define who we are as followers of Christ. Too often, when we get ministry titles or positions of authority, we allow that position, after a while, take away from our growth. And I felt this personally, and I've seen it. And because God still uses us, which God will still use a willing heart, we feel that we are living the fullness of our potential when we're really not. And that's what I'm all about. Not just going to church and living a life where we get just a portion of God. No, I want the fullness of God. I want to know what it's like to experience the fullness of God to where I'm living as God calls me to live. And that's an amazing thing, I think, as Christians, to have the ability to live in the fullness of what God envisioned for us from the beginning, in that right relationship with God. And I'll tell you this, those are phrases that you will always hear me go on and on and on about. The fullness of one's potential. I am a proud proponent of living in the fullness of one's potential. But in order to do this, you must first know yourself, which brings us back to identity. You must know who you are. You must know the path you are on, and you must know where you want to go. You also have to know why you're there to begin with. I believe that these are important because, first of all, I'm a philosopher at heart, and these are kind of concepts and thoughts that I think about all the time. Who, what, where, why, and how. And why something was put forth in the first place. I want to get behind the sense of things, get at the true reality. And, not everybody thinks that way, but that's how my mind works. But this understanding of knowing who you are and where you want to go and why you're there, this paints a picture. It paints a portrait of our identity. Knowing these things are components of knowing who we are. And as Christians, we must be aware that our church affiliations, that our ministry titles, and our positions, they all mean nothing if we do not know who we are. Because we can do these things for the sake of doing them because it gives us a picture or gives us a sense of who we think we are or who we want to be. But if that's not who we are, then what's the point of living it? Identity is important. It's one of the most important things that we can come to grips and come to terms with, come to a better understanding of as a Christian, as a person. You know, I can't tell you who you are. You probably wouldn't believe me anyway. The impact or the importance of knowing who you are would not be as lasting if it's not a revelation you came to on your own and through the power of the Holy Spirit. Identity comes in knowing the truth, in accepting truth, and in living in truth. Having a grasp on these three concepts is the beginning of realizing who you are. There is no greater guide than the Spirit of truth. There is no greater teacher, no greater example than He who is the way, the truth, and the life. We want to know why we are. We begin by knowing God. We want to know who we are. We want to know why things are the way that they are. We got to know who Christ is. You know, and to know who Christ is, we have to know who we are. We have to know our identity. We have to know who we are. We have to know who we want to be. And when we come to that understanding in relation to God, then we can come to know Christ even better. You know, identity can be tricky because we are given so many different masks to wear from the time we are born. We wear them so long, we add to them ourselves over the years, that we eventually get convinced of this person that we think we are. And we have forgotten not only who we really are, but who we are really meant to be. So, living in fullness of one's potential is about knowing our identity and walking in that truth. And the truth begins with Christ. So the question that we have to always ask ourselves, are we willing to take that walk with Christ? Are we willing to allow Christ to give us a vision of who we are? You know, we look at the Bible and we look at the life that Christ lived, and He painted this picture of this is who you are, this is who you are, this is who you are, this is who you're called to be. Are you willing to walk that path? Because when He says follow Him, that's who He's calling us, what He's calling us to do. He's calling us to follow Him as we become aware of our identity, of who we are as children of God, as followers of Christ, as believers in the one and mighty and powerful God. Is that a road you're willing to take?